Let me segue and ask you a question then, because I have a question along exactly what you're talking about with Danny and Giorgio, which is, if people remember, with both you and Empire in different times, we discussed this on Summoning Insight. It was a point Monty made. I thought it was a very interesting point, actually, historically, with how it worked out, which is, if you look, people always forget the order. Like, first of all, the reason why I just corrected you there is because often people do say that. They often say that, like, Danny was on the academy team, and it's like, he wasn't. The whole point is he was on the Prodigies team, which was the amateur team, the third team, as you said, that was set up. And he really did jump from being a total amateur to he's in the LCS, and now he has to be on like a team where he has to win games. So one of the things I noticed you did, though, is people also forget this detail, Peter. They think that like they came up together, whereas, as you say, Danny came up first, and then the following year, 2022, last year, is when Giorgio came into the lineup, right? When Danny initially came in, I remember Monty making this point, because I wasn't a big Deathly fan either, but I didn't know who the fuck Danny is, because he's just an amateur player. When I went and looked, it's like, actually, wait, dude, they haven't thrown him in the deep end. Like, if you look how they're using the Danny guy initially, they sort of protect him a bit. Like, it looks like they set the game up so he actually doesn't have pressure to be like a hard carry and right off the gate. Basically, it's not sink or swim with him. And then people might notice that after Danny got bedded in and it was starting to look good, then when Giorgio came in, you did something similar with him. You sort of shifted, right now Danny gets some resources. Now maybe Giorgio gets a bit protected in some ways. And now look, I'm sure some of this ties into things like the difference is when you have Giorgio, you have Inspired, for example. Like, I'm sure there's other factors here, but can you give us some, like, your version of this story? Like, how did you bring these two players into the lineup? Because I get the vibe, like, a lot of players, like we're talking about earlier, like you said, if you're a veteran, you get a chance to fail. A lot of rookies don't get a chance to fail. You get thrown in the deep end, you're supposed to be good, and if you fail, you're out the door. Whereas you clearly had a different approach to integrating these guys, right?
Yep. So, first thing, Danny wasn't in academy, he was an amateur, but he was finishing his school. So there's no way he could have been in academy.
Right.
So basically he was doing his school while he was remote. We had Shuryu who was in academy, but there was no way that he could have gotten promoted because he like some visa issues. I don't fully understand the details, but basically we couldn't even keep him in an academy the next split because he was never in the US. He never got to come to the US. Which is weird because normally Canada, US visa, but anyway. But anyway, so yes, actually, I saw the show where you talked about it, and I remember thinking when I was watching the show, thinking, "Fuck, they understand what we're doing." Now the North American teams are going to work out what the secret sauce is. And like,
it's actually, by the way, as a quick aside, it's one area where actually people don't give Monty credit for. There's times where he'll just nail like something like that. Like, he'll sort of see. I mean, to be fair, he might have known Empire and secretly been told it behind the scene. You can never know fully on that, but it's true. I actually remember when he first said it to me, I was like, "Is this like a theory or something?" But then you saw the results. You're like, "Dude, it's right. You just nailed it." Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest, this was. I mean, basically that was our entire strategy. And when we promoted Danny, there were three things that were made really, really clear to EG. Number one, be aware of, like, because his parents were really, really clear on what Danny was like outside of the game, and we were really clear. Promoting him is a risk. We believe he has the talent. We believe we have the right staff in place to do it, but be aware that you need to make special precautions for this player. Right, number one. Number two, he has to finish his school first. It doesn't matter if we don't scrim before summer. He finishes his final exams and he does all of his coursework and things like this. And there were times we didn't scrim because he had a class or he had like a final paper to hand in before summer split. And number three, we don't kick him after one split, right? Unless it's for out of game reasons. For in-game reasons, he gets the time to grow. There were more precautions for Danny rather than Jojo because of reasons I'll talk about in a sec with Jojo. But basically, those were the things, and I thought that I was going to have a huge talk with Impact to try to pitch him on this idea about why we thought Danny was it. And he came into the meeting. He was like, "We should promote Danny." And I was
Perfect, yeah.
Okay. I have 3 pages of notes where I'm going to argue with you, but fine. Yeah, I mean, working with Impact was awesome. But yeah, and a lot of this came down to making him feel comfortable in things like draft. So obviously, like, Danny has a very close relationship with LS, and that means that sometimes he'll come into scrims wanting to play things which I don't always think are the best idea, but which will make, but we will make it work. We will set aside time for him to play his picks, and I would say that there's three things that Danny really, really showed good strength on, which I think are basically down to LS. Number one, his Seraphine was always insane. Number two, he had a really, really good center. And number three, his Seraphine center, and he could play Vex. We played Vex spot,
Right.
which we never showed on stage. But there was no way that he was coming up with those things just by himself.
Sure.
I mean, he was getting input. So we gave him time to go and do his things. And I think that there's one game that, I still get death threats. I got death threats, so many death threats on this from people who clearly gambled on the series, right? But there was a series where we were playing against 100 Thieves, where it was 2-2, and he just had an insane game on Tristana where he almost carried the game with an unofficial penta. And last game, he said that he wanted to play Ziggs in the final game. And people were like, oh, why didn't you put him on Tristana in this game and things like this? Well, there's two things for this. Number one, there was a situation in Summer Split where basically, so Jizuke is a really, really nice player to work with, but sometimes he can be really, really inconsistent with his thoughts and draft, and you can come up with plans, a lot of plans that you spend a week building up to, and then on a whim he'll change his mind. And I remember this because it was significant for my time on EG, but it was week 4 against Team Liquid in Summer Split. And there was a situation where we practiced the whole week for Impact to go mid and him to go top in a certain situation where we would be playing Akali into Gwen, and he was more comfortable on Akali. So we'd practice lane swapping, and we'd done practices of the draft and things like this, right? And he basically decided on stage on 5th pick of the draft, when the draft was already done, we go Nico. In like the worst Nico draft. It's like the absolute most garbage Nico draft of all. And I went off stage there and I almost broke a door because I was so pissed off. But obviously I never showed it in front of the players. But basically, and we lost the game because obviously the Nico draft was horrifically bad. It could have cost us a place in playoffs. And after that, I was like, okay, I'm not drafting on stage in this situation, right? We'll do the draft prep together, but Artemis, you're really drafting is your most comfortable part about the game. We'll talk about the draft together, but you can leave the draft, and obviously I'll put my input in. But if this happens again, I don't know how I'm going to react. And to be clear, I don't get angry. I really I'm not the type of coach who loses their temper at all. But basically, I'm surprised that I didn't get fined for that, because that's obviously you're not supposed to do that in backstage. So I wasn't doing the primary draft, and so when all the people were flaming me for draft, that wasn't my draft. But I will say that in that situation, with Danny as confident that he wanted to play Ziggs as he was, we would have picked Ziggs in that situation. He really, really wanted Ziggs. He was really confident on his majors, and Ziggs into Aphelios is a really good matchup. So that's. But to me, when it didn't work out, that was part of Danny's growth as a player. Right? It was This is something he took responsibility in a situation like this, when most rookies would have shied away from that spot. His teammates had faith in him. It didn't work out. Fine, doesn't matter. Move on. And I think he learned a lot from that as a player.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.